It's been nearly 2 years since we started growing no-dig vegetables here in a Mediterranean type climate. And what started out as a compacted, hot and exposed terrace is now finally starting to look like something. Before this, we ran a no-dig market garden in France, and I have to say the intense heat and dry conditions that we have here now make it a whole different and challenging game. Hi, my name is Moreno from RootsReconnected.com, and in this video I want to share with you that with the right adjustments, no-dig gardening can be highly effective even in a hot and dry climate. And I want to share with you 7 tips that we use that help us grow great no-dig vegetables successfully in the Mediterranean heat. But first, what exactly is no-dig gardening again? No-dig gardening is a no-till approach to growing food where you leave the soil undisturbed, and instead of tilling or turning the soil, you focus on layering organic materials on top. This method promotes healthy soil structure and biodiversity. It enhances natural soil processes and helps with nutrient cycling. Now, one of the biggest benefits of no-dig gardening is that it improves the soil's ability to retain moisture, which is especially important here in a hot climate like the Mediterranean. It also helps reduce weed growth by covering the soil with mulch and organic matter. Plus, it saves you a lot of physical effort and time once the garden is in place. However, gardening in a hot climate is different from gardening in a cooler one, and the approach needs to be adjusted to suit the harsher conditions. On this particular area of our homestead, we've had a real challenge with our soil. It is extremely compact and poor, which made it difficult to get our garden going. But now, after spending a ton of time and resources on improving the health of the soil, it's finally starting to become how we like to see it. We regularly add compost and organic matter to enrich the soil, and I have to say we've also been secretly getting help from moles. In fact, they're starting to become a bit of a problem. Since this specific area is the most hydrated part of our land, the moles tend to stick around for longer. Now, in all honesty, it's a bit of a situation. On the one side, they are amazing because they help loosen and aerate the lower soils. They create tunnels and improve water and oxygen infiltration. On the other hand, we're losing a lot of food to them. So for now, we let them be because ultimately they're improving our soil and getting rid of the hard pan, which means they're preparing our garden soil and making it amazing for years to come. But once that job is done, we do have to come up with a solution to make sure it doesn't get out of hand. So if you have any suggestions, please let me know in the comment section below. So now that you understand the basics of no-dig gardening and its benefits, let's dive into the 7 most effective tips for growing no-dig vegetables in the Mediterranean heat, where I will compare practices in the Mediterranean to those in cooler temperate climates, share what we currently do and explain how these methods are working. Starting with tip number 1, and that is to protect your soil with mulch. Essentially, that's the whole concept of no-dig gardening. It is to cover the soil with a thick layer of organic matter, normally in the form of compost. But in the Mediterranean climate, using compost as mulch completely exposed to the sun is not a good idea. And the reason is simple. Since the sun is so harsh in this area and we get long periods with no rain at all, it dries the compost out extremely fast. In fact, it becomes so dry that it very quickly turns hydrophobic. This means that the compost will repel water instead of absorbing it. And this prevents soil organisms from thriving and locks up nutrients, making them unavailable to plants. And when compost dries out, it forms a crust that water can't easily penetrate, leading to inefficient watering and nutrient uptake. This not only stresses your plant, but also disrupts the soil ecosystem, making it difficult for beneficial microorganisms to survive and support the health of your plants. In this climate, if your soil isn't protected, it will very quickly dry out and overheat. In fact, depending on the soil type, it can be so bad that it turns your soil quite literally into something as hard as concrete, which is what happens with our soil if it's completely exposed. Not really ideal to grow vegetables. To help with this, we need to protect our soil and use a thick layer of mulch. This is going to help retain moisture, regulate soil temperature and protect your plants better from the heat. In this specific garden, We still follow the same principle of creating our beds with a thick layer of compost of roughly 20 centimeters or 8-ish inches. And after that, we also cover the compost with an additional thick layer of mulch like straw or wood chips. This double layer helps to keep the soil moist and cool, which allows us to grow great veggies even in the intense heat we get here. In our market garden, which was in a much cooler climate, the compost mulch that we used was primarily used for weed control, moisture retention and feeding the soil food web. But in those conditions, we didn't have to use a mulch like wood chips or straw or on top of the compost. In fact, that could cause a huge problem with snails and slugs that thrive in these conditions. However, we did cover our pathways with wood chips at the time, and that worked out great. But if you're in an overly wet climate and have to deal with lots of slugs and snails, you might want to consider mulching your pathways with compost as well. And this is something that Charles Dowding is doing in the UK, and his results speak for themselves. Right now, here on our homestead, we use a thick layer of organic mulch on top of the compost. More specifically, we use these untreated pine bark wood chips because the straw that we can get in this area comes from conventional farms in Spain and is treated with all sorts of herbicides and pesticides which will leach into your soil that your plants then take in and you will be eating. But the pine bark chips, on the other hand, are untreated and are sourced directly from the sawmill. Now, many people worry that using wood chips will deplete the soil of nitrogen. However, as long as the mulch is not mixed into the soil, this is not really an issue. During the wetter and cooler seasons, the wood chips will naturally break down into excellent compost, providing plenty of nutrients for the plants. As the wood chips decompose, they will also create what is called a fungal-based soil, which is generally more suitable for trees and shrubs. Vegetables, being mostly annual plants in our climate, supposedly do better in bacterial-based soils, but we found that vegetables also thrive in these conditions. And the gardens of Jean Pain, who is maybe better known for his compost-based bioenergy system in the south of France, which has a similar climate to us, show that the vegetables flourish in fungal-dominated soils. So it's just a slight change in the approach that we take compared to our previous farm. But last year, when we didn't have the wood chips on the beds, the gardens were in a much worse condition. And this year, things are actually doing much better. So we'll definitely keep going forward with this approach. Which brings us to tip number 2. Use a shade to protect your plants. The sun can be extremely hot here, and when temperatures rise, it can literally scorch your plants, causing a lot of heat stress and even sunburn. And it's quite frustrating to see your hard work suffer because of something as simple as too much sun. Now, to help with this, one effective way to protect your plants is by installing shade. And as you can see here, we don't have much of that yet. But the easiest way to do this is by using shade cloths, which is what we've installed on our greenhouse. These can provide necessary protection from the intense sun, which will help your plants stay healthier and more productive. Unfortunately, we haven't yet installed a shade cloths in our garden, but it is something that we might do in the future if we see that it would significantly improve our production. However, those of you who remember our market garden in France will know that we used our no-dig vegetables under the canopy of trees. And we've had such an amazing experience with that setup that we're now trying to replicate it here in our new garden. In France, the trees provided a perfect natural shade for our veggies, protecting them from the harsh midday sun and creating a microclimate that kept the soil cool and moist. And the results we had were great and the plants thrived. I also love the synergy between the trees and the vegetables, where one provides a shade and the other can benefit from it. So inspired by that success, we've now planted bare-rooted fruit trees in this garden, including an apricot, a peach, a nectarine and a cherry. These trees are still young, but as they grow, they will grow into a beautiful canopy over our vegetable beds. We'll probably add a couple of more trees at a later stage to improve this natural shading system. Eventually, these trees will provide dappled shade to our veggie garden, giving the tender plants a much needed break from the intense Mediterranean heat. Now, when doing something like this, it's important to consider the behavior of the root systems of the different types of trees. Some trees have very aggressive roots that can take over the place and compete for water and nutrients with your vegetables. So as you choose your trees, make sure to figure out first how they are behaving and then plan accordingly. Ultimately, this setup is going to help protect our vegetables from the intense sun, and next to that, it's also going to add another layer of benefit. The fruit trees themselves, once they will mature, they will produce an abundance of delicious fruits that will only make our garden even more productive. It's a win-win situation. The veggies get the shade they need to thrive, and we get a diverse harvest from the fruit trees as well. So if you're in a hot climate, think about using some sort of a shading system, whether it's with a shade cloths or under trees. It will be a big help for your garden. Tip number 3. Choose the right vegetable varieties. Here in the Mediterranean type climate, everything is green in winter and dry and barren looking in summer. The cool and more humid winter months are great for growing lots of leafy type vegetables, including brassicas, whereas in summer it becomes quite difficult to grow them. And we need to focus on completely different plants. That's why it is important to choose the right vegetables and varieties and plant them at the right times of the year. The biggest advantage we have now compared to our previous farm in France is that our growing season is much longer than we were used to. And by planning the last plantings of fall correctly, even winter can be an amazing time to grow food here. With temperatures not going far below zero, and with a little bit of planning, we can have 8 months of the year where temperatures are really pleasant for gardening. The other 4 or 5 months, generally from June to September and sometimes even into October, temperatures can be really high and there's no drop of rain. These are the months we really have to have varieties that can withstand these conditions. So during these more challenging months, we need to focus on planting varieties that are known for their resilience in hot and dry conditions. By choosing heat and drought tolerant veggies, we can achieve much better survival rates and productivity during extreme heat and dry spells. It's a simple yet effective way to make your garden more resilient and less dependent on constant watering. So especially here on our land, it is essential that we choose vegetables that can withstand these conditions. Some good examples include corn, tomatoes, eggplants and okra. These plants thrive in the heat and can continue producing even when water is relatively scarce. Some varieties of Swiss chard and certain types of beans are also more resilient in hot weather, and they're doing great in our garden. Now, finding the right varieties and the types of plants during these challenging months can take a couple of years. And the best way I found to figure this out quickly is to talk with growers in your area and use seed companies that are in similar climates to you. And then simply research and experiment with different varieties to find the ones that will perform the best in your specific conditions. Every garden is unique, so what works well for one may not be as successful in another. Right now we're trying out many different varieties of lettuces, tomatoes and all sorts of crops really, and we take note on what thrives and what doesn't. Like this, each year we select the winners of the previous season, and each season from here on out becomes more abundant and more productive as you find the varieties and plants that do well during the different times of the year. Which brings us to tip number 4. Use drip irrigation for efficient watering. Traditional watering methods can waste a lot of water and often fail to deliver moisture effectively to plant roots. This leads to dry soil, stressed out plants and higher water bills, which can be frustrating and costly. On our farm in France, we've always used overhead irrigation in our outdoor gardens to irrigate pretty much everything, and it worked out perfectly. But right now in these gardens, this isn't exactly the most effective or best option to irrigate our beds, and instead the best option we have during the hotter months of the year is using a drip irrigation system like this one right here. Drip systems are a great solution because they deliver water directly to the roots. They're very effective and considerably reduce the amount of waste and give all your plants the exact hydration they need. And this method is particularly effective during summer here in our hot and dry climate. In more temperate climates, drip irrigation is beneficial but not as critical. And personally, on our farm in France, we've only used them in our greenhouse to irrigate our tomatoes and cucumbers. In these cooler regions, which typically have more consistent rainfall and lower temperatures, overhead irrigation can be more effective. It certainly is better to help germinate direct seeded crops. However, drip irrigation still offers the advantage of precise water delivery and reduced waste, making it a good practice in any climate for that matter. And in this garden, we've installed both a drip system as well as an overhead irrigation system. Every bed has 4 of these lines that water our plants directly at the root zone. Plus, since we've covered them, well, not this one, but most of them under the mulch, it will protect the pipes from the sun, which will help keep the water cooler in the pipes. This approach significantly reduces the water waste and makes sure that our plants maintain consistent moisture levels even during the hottest parts of the year. But we do use overhead as well. Tip 5. Use overhead irrigation for cooling. In temperate climates, overhead irrigation is primarily used for regular watering rather than cooling. These regions don't typically experience the same level of extreme heat, so the primary goal of overhead irrigation here is to ensure even water distribution rather than temperature control. In the Mediterranean, however, where the heat can be particularly intense, we now mostly use overhead irrigation for cooling purposes during the hot summer months. Extreme heat can stress out plants, and this can result in reduced growth and yield. And when plants are exposed to high temperatures, they may wilt, scorch, or even die, which can significantly impact the overall productivity of your garden. Now, one solution I found to be effective for this problem is using overhead irrigation during the hottest part of the day. By sprinkling the plants during the hottest hours, you can help lower the temperature of both the plants and the soil, providing much needed relief from the scorching sun. A lot of people think that if you water during the heat of the day, it can lead to quicker sunburn, but I believe this to be a myth. We haven't noticed anything like it, and if anything, it has only helped our production so far. However, it is important to use overhead irrigation with limits. Using this method too much can make the area too humid, which might lead to plant diseases. Now, to avoid this, we use overhead irrigation only when necessary, and we closely monitor the humidity levels in our garden. We typically use it once a day during the hottest times of the year, usually early in the afternoon. This schedule allows the plants to dry before nighttime, and it's a simple technique that can make a big difference in keeping a healthy garden in a hot climate. But just as it's important to use the right type of irrigation, it is also important to have a good watering schedule, which is tip number 6. In hot climates specifically, high temperatures can cause water to quickly evaporate, which leads to water loss in underhydrated plants. And so far, we've found that the key to maintaining a healthy garden in these conditions is consistent and strategic watering. To address this, we do a deep watering of our garden automatically each morning using a drip irrigation system on a timer. This makes sure our plants get the needed water directly at the roots before the day's heat kicks in. Then in the early afternoon, we use the overhead irrigation for cooling. And this helps to reduce the heat stress on our plants and keep the overall garden environment at a much more comfortable level during the hardest parts of the day. Now, this approach in combination with the mulch and using the right heat-resistant varieties allows us to grow great vegetables despite the challenges of a hot climate. Now, on extremely hot days, it is possible that your garden will need additional deep watering once or twice per week at night. This helps keep the soil sufficiently watered and moist even during long periods of extreme heat. And that's something that we do as well. We closely monitor the soil moisture levels and adjust our schedule as needed to keep our plants healthy and productive. Having said that, we do want to avoid watering any of the foliage of the more sensitive crops like the tomatoes and cucumbers, and others that don't like it when the leaves are wet for too long. Excessive moisture on the leaves of these plants can make them more susceptible to diseases. So it is best to use drip irrigation for these sensitive crops to get water directly to the roots without wetting the leaves. This optimization of the watering schedule and using both drip and overhead irrigation at the right times of the day can greatly improve the health and productivity of your garden. But there's another challenge that we are dealing with, and that is wind. Sorry, I'm just having a quick strawberry break. We've been getting kilos and kilos and kilos of this one already. It is insane. Anyway, in hot climates, wind can be a major factor in drying out your soil and stressing your plants. And to protect your garden from hot, drying winds, creating some kind of a windbreak is a must, especially if your gardens are too exposed, which is the case for us. Now, windbreaks can help to reduce the wind speed, which in turn minimizes soil erosion. It reduces water loss through evaporation and protects plants from wind damage. In fact, I remember our first year on this land, right after we completed all the major earthworks, most of the soil was exposed and there was no protection from the wind at all. And during that time, we experienced several smaller tornadoes that were quite strong, showing us just how important, showing us how important good windbreaks are. So on our homestead, we've tackled this by planting a windbreak on the exposed side of our garden. But we didn't just want any kind of windbreak. We wanted one that would be productive and beneficial to our homestead. So we selected a variety of trees and shrubs that will effectively break the wind, but also provide us with a bounty of fruits and nuts. Our windbreak now includes hazelnuts, almonds, apples, this cherry, pomegranates, feijoas, and much more. And these plants are all strategically placed to eventually form a dense barrier that slows down the wind before it reaches our vegetable garden, which is going to help reduce the stress on plants and ultimately lead to a healthier and more productive garden. And secondly, as these plants mature, they provide us with a variety of fruits and nuts, improving our self-sufficiency. So it's not only going to protect our garden, but it's also contributing to biodiversity and offers additional harvest, which is awesome. Now, when planning your windbreak, you will need to consider the mature size of the plants, their growth habits, and their compatibility with each other. It is also important to note that the effectiveness of a windbreak can be influenced by the height, density, and the length of the plantings. A well-designed windbreak can reduce the wind speed for a distance of up to 10 times the height of the tallest tree. So in our case, apart from some short-term biomass species, we haven't included any extremely large canopy trees, and instead we planted shorter sub-canopy species that are tall enough to block the wind but will not become so large that they will overshadow the garden and dominate the space. This is a great strategy for protecting your garden in hot climates. It provides a dual benefit of wind protection and food production that will make our homestead only more resilient and productive in the long run. So if you haven't yet considered windbreaks, now might be the perfect time to start planning one for your garden. And in the meantime, I will eat this strawberry. And these are the 7 tips that allow us to grow great no-dig vegetables in the hot Mediterranean climate. While gardening in a hot climate requires some adjustments, these strategies will help keep your gardens healthy and productive. It is all about working with the environment and not against it. So whether you're just starting out or you're looking to improve your current setup, I hope these tips can help you achieve a thriving garden. Thank you for watching. Happy gardening. Until next time.